Well, you could hardly live even in this remote corner of the world, New Zealand, and not understand that the world is changing. It is going through a period of transition. And many of the old certainties about the world we live in appear to be, well, in flux. The most recent example of this, of course, is the, to some, surprising change of stance on support for Ukraine from the Trump administration, best personified, obviously, in that explosive meeting in the White House. Some are saying it indicates an America that is returning to a form of isolation or utter self-interest. And Europe seems to have responded in kind. As I probably cynically suggested, no one is hanging on the words of what Chris Luxon thought of the Zelenskyy-Trump meeting. But those changes in geopolitics do have impacts in New Zealand and do ask questions of us as a country as to how we best represent, maintain or enhance our position in the world, and I would say particularly in terms of our military and strategic alliances. A former Prime Minister, Helen Clark, who you might sometimes think is still leading the Labour Party, has for some time said we should not shouldn't join AUKUS, that is Australia, US, UK alliance, that we should stay out of AUKUS. We are looking at joining AUKUS through a second tier, a sort of bronze membership of AUKUS. It's like being a jade member of the Corrie Club. But now we have the change in America's attitude towards Europe. Where are we? And are we big enough militarily to even be players in this game? Judith Collins, the Minister of Defence, joins us now. Minister, good morning. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Sean.
Would you agree we are living in a time of, well, I'm just trying to think of a time when the world was changing or in so much flux in terms of defence and geopolitics?
Yes, in fact, I agreed with everything you just said before. It's a very challenging time, and for New Zealand, we have to take this as an opportunity to do better, but also to be very aware that the world is not like it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, and that it is actually a very dangerous place.
Also, I guess, Minister, that the classic reactions or positions of a country like the United States, where we could reliably predict what their response to us doing something would be, doesn't quite seem to be there. We can't say we know exactly how people will respond to what we do anymore.
Well, I think what is clear is that the United States is pivoting more towards the Indo-Pacific region. They made that very clear. I watched the Senate hearings, confirmation hearings for my defence counterpart. Really clear they're not looking to Europe as they might have for the last 70 years. Actually, from our point of view, then pivoting to the Indo-Pacific could be considered a good thing when it comes to security, but obviously really hard on countries like Ukraine. But the Indo-Pacific is something that for the last 20-odd years, the US has not been as actively involved with as some people might have hoped.
Okay. So you're almost suggesting, Minister, there's a possibility it's not isolationism per se from the Trump administration. It is Europe's too far away, our immediate sphere of influence. Well, it's our part of the world, maybe.
Well, that's what it seems to be. But look, I think these things still have quite a long way to play out because we're only in the first 6 weeks of the new administration. So there's still a long way to go. But what I see is the US is a Pacific nation. Their entire western coast is Pacific. They've got Hawaii, Guam, other territories and connections such as the Marshall Islands there. It's quite clear is that they're looking much more towards the Pacific now.
And the only other superpower in the world is China. Russia isn't a superpower anymore. And the Indo-Pacific region is where the US and China butt heads. We're the buffer zone.
Yes, and well, it's also, of course, I just throw in there is that Russia is also a Pacific nation too. So it is a very interesting part of the world when it comes to defence and security and geopolitical rivalry. And the other thing that Indo-Pacific has is enormous mineral resources on that seabed. And you can see that with the Cook Islands deal with China. That is one of the big drivers of we're going to see is, I think, a much more interesting and dynamic time in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah. Minister, given that, and I think it's a very interesting and very credible analysis that our part of the world becomes more important to the United States. That therefore means we have more to gain and also maybe more to lose.
Yes, that's right. So we've got to be very careful.
Yeah. All right. Renewed calls for us to stay out of AUKUS because, of course, Donald Trump's, the most terrible thing ever to happen to world politics. I see Helen Clark's and her partly taxpayer-funded Helen Clark Foundation are back into that like robbers' dogs. Where are we? Where is the government on AUKUS? At what stage? Or where is diplomacy on that right now?
Well, I think there's been, everyone is still working on our defence capability plan, and we believe that we would have quite a lot to add to AUKUS Pillar 2, which is the technology side, but we have to decide whether or not we want to take that further. And I think also is that everyone's just seeing how this all shakes down. Is there now still support for AUKUS within the US? I think that there is, but we're just waiting to see how it goes. Look, I think in many ways this is a time to be very calm.
Yeah.
I heard the calls from Helen Clark, and I thought, like you, where is the leader of the opposition party? That's everyone to be there. But also, it's a sad time when somebody just cannot get their head around the fact that the world is not this benign strategic environment. We're living in a time where the Indo-Pacific has become a highly contested area, and we need to be fully aware of that.
Do you think Helen Clark's been naive?
Well, I think Helen's always had a very difficult relationship with any concept of defence. We look at, say, for instance, when we had the warships from China visiting the Tasman and undertaking live fire. Normally, a country might be able to send off some planes, or they might be able to send off something else. We were very careful, we were very measured, but we were there. We don't have the same ability that we used to have, and actually partly it's down to the 35 years of cutting of just about everything defence has had. And Helen was very much part of that. So I think, maybe she always looks to Europe. I think we need to look to our own best interests as well.
This is. I'm finding this very interesting, Minister, because it also means that maybe America changes its focus. Maybe we do a little too, and some of our traditional ties are not so important as dealing with the real world as it is now in our corner of the world. One thing that is coming through consistently, and I see growing calls from many quarters in New Zealand, many thinkers on defence and strategy, that we simply have to up our spending on defence as a proportion of GDP if we are not to become totally irrelevant. In other words, if we want to play any part in whatever new world emerges, we have to have the credibility to do so, and at our current levels of defence spending, we simply don't. Yes,
so thankfully, if we have a look at our levels of defence spending since 1990, there has been a steady decrease, and there's a lot of talk about is it this percentage or that percent. The main point is that we lost an enormous number of highly skilled professional people in the COVID times. That was another hit that the Defence Force took. and we're only just starting to rebuild that. And so even if we had so much money we didn't know what to do with, we would be in that situation of not being able to do anything because we have to rebuild, but we do need to have a significant increase in defence, and we need it not just as a sugar hit. We need it over a relatively long term so that there is a plan that's costed and that's going to be funded. So that's what we've got coming.